So today we're going to talk a little bit about adoption and loss. And so today we have Rachel, and Rachel's going to share a little bit about who she is, and we're just going to talk through a few things.
So I'm Rachel. I'm the Director of Family Services here at Christian Family Care. I've been with the agency for almost 6 years. I started as a pregnancy counselor, so this work is very close to my heart. I worked with quite a few women who made adoption plans, and many of whom I'm still in contact with, talk to, they check in, so that's nice. I'm also a licensed counselor, so I do counseling. So I want to talk a little bit about grief and loss as it relates to adoption and even parenting, because adoption doesn't happen without loss. So when you look at parents who are hoping to adopt, they may come to adoption because of infertility, so they may not be able to have their own biological children, which is one reason they look into adoption. We hear from some of our expectant mothers that they prefer to place with families who are unable to have children of their own. It's very often something that they want to bless a family with. So there's loss there, the loss of the child they will never have biologically. There's loss for the child, so when a child is born, they're used to their mother's voice and her movements and her, just who she is. There's an attachment that's developed in utero. And when a baby is born, even when there's a plan, even when it's beautifully executed, that baby loses that voice and that comfort of their mother when they're placed into the arms of the adoptive parents. So there's loss right away for that baby. And there's a great loss for women who choose to place for adoption. Yeah, so when a birth mother leaves the hospital, she's leaving without a baby. And that's, for many women, the first moment where the reality of the loss sets in. It's also one of the reasons we don't ever ask women to sign consents right away. The law says that you can't sign until at least 72 hours, which is 3 days. But very often we extend that a little bit to give that birth mother time to think about her decision, to experience the separation from her baby, and see if she can live with that grief, with that loss, with that decision. So we want her to take her time making that decision. And sometimes it's good to do that away from the baby, so you can truly experience what it's like without the baby before you make the decision. We have had women make the decision for adoption. The baby goes home with the family. And a few days later, the mom says she wants to parent, which is a decision we celebrate. That's also a loss for the adoptive family who had hoped to adopt that baby. But we believe that if the birth mother chooses to parent, that's where that baby needs to be. And we'll help walk that family through that loss. But we'll celebrate with that woman for choosing to parent, which is where we step in and offer our parenting support.
So as an agency, we believe that open adoption is the best option when it comes to adoption. Obviously, adoption is hard regardless of if it's closed or open or semi-open. So can you talk a little bit about grief and loss, and with an open adoption, how can that help a birth mom process that loss in ongoing years?
So being in an open adoption means that you are very often going to have visits with that child. And if visits sound too hard initially, it may look like pictures with updates from the family. And what we found about that is that it brings a birth mother or her birth father comfort to see that the baby is doing well and that the baby is loved and cherished by the family. It can be bittersweet. It can be a reminder of the loss and that you aren't parenting that child. And it can be assurance that you made the right decision and that that baby has everything that you had wanted for that baby but couldn't provide.
So we also see that loss affects extended birth family members, regardless of how involved they are in the adoption process. Can you share a little bit about that?
We see many family members grieve the loss of a child placed through adoption. Grandparents can't make decisions for their children if they're pregnant and considering their options. So there's a sense of loss of control. They can't make the decision whether they think adoption is best. We see that sometimes. Or whether they think they're their child should parent their baby. They can't make that decision. That decision is made by the birth parent alone, and when that decision is made and it's not what the grandparent would have wished, there's a loss attached to that. And one thing that we do here is we work with grandparents if they're struggling and they need to check in and they need to process and talk about that loss. We can do that with family members. Siblings are another member of the family that can suffer. We have some women who have other children or in the future have children that they don't place. And that loss for that sibling is sometimes unacknowledged and not talked about. And when we see losses that aren't talked about, it can cause complicated grief. And adoption is one of those losses that unfortunately is unacknowledged by society. It's not comfortable to bring it up in normal conversation. So when it's your child's birthday, you don't typically get to go around showing pictures of your child or having a birthday party. That's a loss. And so loss can happen when you leave the hospital and you no longer have a baby in your arms, and loss can happen on that child's birthday, on Christmas, when you know that child is opening presents with their family and not with you. So the struggle, loss is difficult for women and fathers who place children for adoption because it can constantly be activated. It can come out of the blue. And so what we want expectant parents to know who are considering adoption is that grief is going to be a part of your story. And we're here to help you through it. So if you ultimately decide that adoption is best for you and for your baby, then we want to be here for you and walk you through that journey. It may start right when you leave the hospital, and that may mean that we sit with you that day, the next day, the day after, in the weeks after. We may spend a lot of time with you if that's what you need. But often you need some time alone, and that's okay. And sometimes it's weeks, months, even years later where you start to acknowledge the reality of your loss and where you think you need some help. And we want to be the first place you come because we understand the depths of that loss, and we want to sit with you, help you process that grief, and help you adjust to a new reality. A part of grief is living your life and putting that loss in its place. It will always be there, and we want to help you process that through.
I want to go back to something you said, because we were talking about extended birth family and how the sibling can have that loss, even if it's a future child. But I think sometimes society, and even I think we often miss the piece of the loss of the adoptee. And I know you talked about that initial loss of this child's been with this mom for 9 months, and there's that attachment there. And then when you remove that child, that's lost. But also, like in the future of with open adoption, that child may have a relationship with mom. Mom may have children in the future. So how do you think adoptive families and even birth parents can navigate that as the child grows?
One of the beautiful things about open adoption is that when it's open from the beginning, it becomes that child's normal. So it's not that that child is now 7 and learns that they have biological siblings, or they start to have a relationship with their birth parent and they have to adjust to that as new and different. When a child grows up, much like with grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, they grow up and that becomes a part of their reality. I have birth parents, I have siblings that don't live with me, and that becomes part of their normal. And so having visits with those siblings becomes something that you can look forward to, that you can talk about as coming up. And when those children are old enough to talk and have conversations, questions can be asked and questions can be answered, and they can develop their own relationship under the safety net of the adoptive parents and the birth parents.
One thing that I think is important and why I appreciate the way we do our work here is that we want families and we want birth parents to come back to us if they're struggling with navigating those conversations or navigating that open adoption relationship, or if birth parents are experiencing that loss down the road, maybe 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, that really hit them. they may not have been ready to process that in the moment, and we may not have heard from them, but down the road we're able to contact them. I know you've moved far from your position of pregnancy counselor, but you're still in contact with a lot of the birth moms that have placed, and you were their pregnancy counselor. So I think that really shows where our hearts are in this work, is that we really want to support families, both the adoptive family, the adoptee, and the birth parents throughout, and the extended birth families too.
I think one reason that is because we really climb into the trenches with our expectant parents and our birth parents. We're not afraid of the grief or the emotions that might come up as a result of choosing adoption or considering adoption. So we really do get in the trenches with them and live it with them. And there's a bond that develops when you walk so deeply with somebody through something that is such a deep loss. And when that connection is made, it's hard to just let that go. And that there may be a lot of contact for a while between a pregnancy counselor and a birth parent after a child is placed, and then it may fade over time. But I think the reason that many of us are still in contact with some of our birth parents is because of that connection, and it was developed, and it may not be now to process grief, but something great may have happened in their life, and they want to share it with somebody who understands the depths of their pain. Very often we reach out to our birth mothers on Birth Mother's Day, which is a special day set apart for women who place for adoption, to honor the fact that they are still a mother. And we will reach out to our birth moms and acknowledge that, and to say that we're thinking of them. And that's significant to them because somebody remembers. It's not forgotten. And when the world at large and society and sometimes even their family and their friends tell them to just get over it and move on, we're still saying, yeah, but I know what you did, and I know the significance of the decision you made, and I know how hard it was, and I know that you broke your own heart so that your child could have everything that you wanted your child to have. So we want to acknowledge that and then sit with you in sometimes the pain that comes up when that loss is acknowledged.
Yeah, and regardless of the reason they came to the decision to place for adoption, it's hard. Yeah. There might be valid reasons. There might be reasons why no one might there could be people don't understand those reasons, but I just think it's such a unique, pregnancy counseling so unique, because it's like you're really going through something that's so significant. Yeah. Sometimes being there during delivery and just walking through that, through some of the hardest days of someone's life. Yeah. So it's just such a unique role of, this society thinks adoption is this beautiful thing, which it is, and it can be, but it's learning how something can be so painful and so heartbreaking, but also beautiful at the same time. I think that's where it's hard to figure that out, but I think we've seen it so often. But yeah, it's just so paired together with that loss and that beauty through it.
Well, I think what you said there was important too, is that is important. Yeah. It's very often our women tell us that it was the right decision to make to place for adoption, but they're also grieving. And when we can change our language to say, it was the right decision for me, and I'm still grieving, that both can be true at the same time, both can coexist. That's where we step in and say both can be true. One doesn't mean it has to be, one doesn't have to be separate from the other.
And I think God designed us to be with our biological family, and we know that. And so in that, that's a significant loss. So it's normalizing that. Like, we know that you think this was the best decision, and we know that this is hard, and it's okay to not be okay where you're at.
Okay to be not okay. Yeah. That's not a message the world will tell you. Yeah. The world tells you, get up, get over it, move on. You'll have other children. You'll have other opportunities. Those are things people say to make themselves feel better. They don't help somebody who's sitting in grief. When somebody's grieving, we want to say, I see you, and I see your pain. And even if I do nothing other than sit next to you while you cry, that's what we're going to do with you. So most of the time, we're looking for opportunities not to sit in an office and talk about the adoption or talk about the adoptive family or even talk about your child. We want to go get coffee somewhere and just have a conversation with you. It doesn't have to be about anything related to grief and loss. It can be about your life. It can be about your relationships. We just want to spend that time with you because if you're grieving, most often you're going to be comforted by somebody sitting there with you in that grief and not telling you what to do, how to grieve, how to move on, what you should have done. All of these messages are going to come at you from other people, and we want to be that neutral person who just sits with you in that pain.
I think one of my favorite pieces of this job is not necessarily the adoption planning or the initial process, and not even necessarily the grief counseling of it, of just hearing from someone months down the road, year down the road, 2 years down the road, and just saying, let's get lunch, and hearing about what's going on and how we can help too, of like, is there something you need help with life skills wise, or just finding a new job, or just support, or maybe you're parenting another child and you need parenting support and we can offer that. Like, just staying connected, I think, is so important, because if you did feel like you went through this alone and there's one person that actually went through this with you, although they didn't experience the same thing, but they were there, that's, I think, a connection that'll last for life.
It makes it easier for somebody to come back and ask for help when there was a relationship built and there's trust developed. And they can come back, and sometimes it's to celebrate what's going well in their life, or an accomplishment, or to tell us, I just broke up with a birth father and I'm not doing so well. And we're here to both celebrate the happy moments and to say, man, I'm really sorry that happened. That must be so difficult for you. Do you want to get coffee? Do you want to talk about it?
So we've talked a lot about the influences when making a decision regarding your pregnancy. So why would someone consider what everybody else is saying? Why is it so important that that pregnancy counselor is the person there that's that neutral voice, that's not telling them what to do?
When decisions need to be made, our tendency is to seek other people out, to get wisdom or to ask questions. What do you think I should do? How do I make this decision? We don't like to make decisions alone. So it's very normal, natural for us to go to the people in our lives. It could be our parents, it could be grandparents, it could be an aunt, an uncle, cousin, sibling. We go to those people and say, what should I do? Or here's the situation. And they feel very comfortable giving you their opinion. They will tell you why you should do what you should do. They sometimes will offer help or assistance if you make the decision that they want you to make. And that's all information expectant mothers and fathers need to take in and listen to, because it's going to affect their life after they make their choice, whether to parent or whether to place for adoption. The struggle is when you're surrounded by people who all have an opinion, it's hard to figure out what yours is. So the purpose of pregnancy counseling is to meet with somebody who isn't going to tell you what to do. They aren't going to tell you what's best for you or what's best for your baby. They're going to listen to you, what you want your future to look like, and they're going to ask you, well, what have people been telling you should do? What are the opinions of the people that matter to you? And we're going to help you figure out what you think is best in a neutral way without judgment. And that gives you the space and the opportunity to explore what each option would look like.
Yeah, and we don't have an agenda. I think when I say that to people, they kind of chuckle a little bit, because they're like, well, you're an adoption agency, you have an agenda. But truly, we don't have an agenda, and that's why we have it set up where, birth parents or expectant moms are going to have their own pregnancy counselor, and the adoption specialist is going to help the adoptive family. So it's fully separate, because we want to be that advocate and that person for the pregnancy client versus, having a dual role where things can get a little twisted.
Yeah, I think that really is important for women to know, is that we are going to walk into a hospital room if you've just had a baby and you're considering your options, or if you're 8 weeks pregnant and you walk into our office and want to talk about things that we are not going to tell you what to do. We are not going to tell you that adoption is best, because the reality is adoption is hard. Adoption comes with grief, and it can come with some benefits, and we can explore those with you. But it also comes with some things that are going to be hard for you to face, and we want you to look at all of those things before making a decision. So when a expectant mother or father or both have decided to pursue adoption and they're ready to look at profiles, they are provided with sometimes a few, sometimes quite a few profiles, and a profile is a letter from the family that includes pictures and text about their lives and who they are and who they want to be as parents. I think that's one of the most daunting moments in an expectant parent's adoption journey, because they're sitting with a bunch of letters from parents who want to adopt their baby, and they have never met them. They don't
How do you
know.
choose someone off of a 4-page letter? That's been the challenge.
How do you choose somebody based on their pictures? So we've seen it go so differently for each expectant mother. Some are drawn in by the pictures. They feel connected to the family, to their neighborhood, to their home, to their pets, or to their hobbies, and they just feel a connection, and they go off of their gut. Other expectant parents, when they're reading the profiles, find some detail that matches, wow, that's who I would be as a mother, or that's how I would be raising them. They homeschool. I love that they homeschool. Something draws them in because they're envisioning their baby with that family, and there's something that just feels right or sounds right.
Well, thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you were personally encouraged. If you'd like to help us make more videos like this, please consider making a tax-deductible donation and telling your friends and families so that we might continue our work to strengthen families.